I'm kind of anxious to hear some of the verses that you guys.
I'm working on a ladies' meeting lesson. I don't have verses.
What was the verses?
We were in Psalms 31 last week, and I wanted you guys to take 5 verses and each day put those verses in your own words. So anybody want to volunteer? I'm kind of anxious to hear some of the verses that you guys.
I'm working on a ladies' meeting lesson. I don't have
Oh, I read the whole book of James.
Oh,
What was the word of me this morning?
well, that's
We
good.
were in Psalms
We
31
finished
last
James,
week,
and I wanted you guys.
Okay.
But it's probably a good thing for you. James is a good book.
Yeah. Could go through that again. I'm sure I didn't get it all.
All right. Anybody have a verse you want to put it that you put in your own words?
I did the first 5. I just
Oh,
did a
okay.
paragraph. Is that okay?
Sure.
In my own words,
Yes.
right?
Good and loud.
Okay. We have this on. Lord, in you, I know with complete confidence and hope that I can run to you for my protection, my place of safety and hope. I can trust and know that I will not be ashamed or disappointed. Rescue me and deliver me, pick me up, because it is you that does everything right and perfect. This is all 5. Oh. Bend down to me, Lord, and hear me, and deliver me, rescue me quickly. Be my defense and my protection. Be my strength and the one that saves and delivers me. You are my high tower, my place of shelter above everything that seeks to destroy me. For your glory, Lord, lead me and carry me and sustain me to a place of rest. Pull me out of the net, those things that have entangled me, or the traps that have been hidden from me. You only can do this. You are my defense. You only can prevail and be my strength and protection. To thy strong, open hand, I give and surrender the possession of my life. You have bought me, paid for me, set me free. I am not my own. You are truth and my stability and assurance. You are faithful.
You ought to put that on your mirror.
Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then believe it.
You could put that in the bulletin.
Yeah, that's true. You could.
That
Alice,
sounds like the Amplified Bible, doesn't it?
you could put it
Was
in the
that the
bulletin.
bulletin?
It was good.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it just means something when we put it in our words. I think
Yeah, I was
it,
crying.
it's a good exercise.
I was crying. Okay, I was reading the whole thing. Anyway.
All right. Anybody else have a verse that you put in your own words? Come on, you guys. You got to do your homework.
I was here.
All right.
She wasn't here, yeah.
All right.
I haven't been in school in a long time.
This morning, I kind of
You want to read one?
I'll give you what I have, but I guess I misunderstood because I texted Leanne this morning and
She didn't.
I
I probably
didn't
told her.
know. So I thought we were supposed to write down the definition first, give the definition, and then in our own words.
Well, if you got it in your own words, that's what I was.
I have more of a definition though.
Oh. Okay.
Can I read that?
Sure.
Okay, I just put on verse 2 where it talks about rock, and the definition is solid mineral material forming a part of the surface of the earth. The rock was Peter's confession of Christ being his rock. And then the rock can mean the rock of pagan values, dead idolatry that was so prominent in Caesarea Philippi. But Jesus then said that his church, Christ is the foundation of the church. Rock indicates firmness, stability, faithfulness, permanence, strength, dependability, steadfast. The rock stresses the unchanging God, unlike the instability of Israel. Large, immovable cliff or boulder. That just reminds me of that scripture that talks about that God's word is sharper than any two. And I need this. I need that I know that I can stand on Him, whether it's good or bad.
Amen. Mom, why don't you read one of yours?
Okay, I just said, safe and my place of defense. There, please lead me and guide me. In verse 5, into your hand I place all that I am, of your blood, O Lord, God of all that is true. Mercy to me, O Lord, for my tears. Yes, everything within me is crying out to you.
Yes.
That you have prepared for those who. And then the last one, verse 24. And the Lord will strengthen all that is needed for every.
This whole psalm was a blessing to me. There's so many things that I think, oh, I should read this every day. And I'd be reading all day long. Any other verses? That's okay.
I did verse 1, and rescue me because you are the God who always does what is right.
So sometimes maybe we could have the psalm open while we pray to encourage us, to give us that God is actually hearing us, and and He will do what's right. He will answer our prayers. He will do the very best for us. Right. So when I pray for Lord to show me what He wants me to go into, I do think eventually I want to go into another book, but not yet. um, Whatever is just uppermost in my heart is usually the thing that I can to and study, and God seems to work in that way for me. So the lesson today, the name of it is Trust in God. As I was studying this week, one of my thoughts was, because I'm going to be talking about the crossing at the Red Sea. And of course, I can get into just about anywhere in the Old Testament because I like the stories. But I was thinking, Lord, is this really what you want me to talk about? And from that point on, the rest of the week, everywhere I turned, somebody was talking about the Red Sea, even in a devotion or two. So I thought, okay, I'll take that. So I liked that first paragraph there is not my own. It was in one of the books I was looking at. I don't remember which one. And it didn't really have it attributed to anybody, so that's why I didn't put a name there. But I liked what they said. Trust is reliance on and confidence in a person. Scripture affirms the total trustworthiness of God, especially in relation to his promises to his people. Christian faith is essentially trust in the person. I don't know if you guys are like this, but for me, I have been raised. I was born in a Christian family and raised to trust God, raised in the Bible and church, and you know, I do not know why. It's hard sometimes to remember that God has my very best at heart, that he loves me. And so I figure, well, maybe it's that way for others too. I don't know why we have a hard time. Maybe it's because it's so different from how we are, really. It is. So, in the concordance, the meaning of trust is confidence, secure, security. And I wanted to put this verse in Isaiah just at the very beginning because it just kind of was a blessing to me. God's cure for darkness. Isaiah 50, verse 10. And I like the Amplified. Who is among you who reverently fears the Lord, who obeys the voice of his servant, yet who walks in darkness and deep trouble, and has no shining splendor in his heart? In King James, it just says, and has no light. But the word is shining splendor. I like that. So, can we be following the Lord and yet walk in darkness and deep trouble? Yes, we can. Because I could probably ask for hands and everybody would raise your hand. You've done that at one time or other. So, what's the answer for that? Let him rely on, trust in, and be confident in the name of the Lord. Let him lean upon and be supported by his God. And that lean upon and be supported also has the intimation of rest also. So this verse is saying, if you feel like you're in darkness, if you're in deep trouble, then the answer is to trust God. And that's not always real easy, because depending on the reasons for our darkness and deep trouble, we don't see a way out real often. Don't see a way out. And that's what brought me to the story of the Red Sea. The Israelites did not have a way out either.
I think that's what love, goodness, sight, and experience.
Yes.
What we're seeing, what we're hearing, and what we're experiencing.
Yes.
Choice to.
And you summed up my life.
Go.
All right, so we're going to talk about Israel a little bit in Exodus 13:21. First of all, before I read that, though, I want you to know, and I want you to think of ways this could be true in your own life. God gave Israel daily, visible evidence that he was with them. Did that through, and I'll show you, verse 21 of chapter 13 of Exodus. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them in the way. I kind of would like him to do that now. No? If there was a big cloud in the day and pillar at night and he'd show me where to go, then I wouldn't have to worry about anything.
But they did.
But they did worry anyways, yeah. And they questioned whether he was among them. When that pillar of cloud and pillar of fire never left during all the time, even during the time that they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, that cloud and pillar never left. Even when they were rotten people, it never left. And so think of ways that God is showing you that he's in your life, he's with you, no matter where you are or what happens. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And you know the cool thing about this pillar of cloud and fire, it wasn't just that he put a cloud in front of them and he put this pillar of fire in front of them, provided it. He was in the pillar of cloud and in the pillar of fire. That was God's presence. Okay? Exodus 14, verse 1. And the Lord spake to Moses, saying, They had just left Egypt, and God was leading them. And so the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and encamp by the sea, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. I will be honored, or receive glory, upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. Okay, a couple of things about this. Moses was in communication with God, and God was leading Israel. And he tells Moses exactly where to lead them. And do you know it would have taken 11 days to go from Egypt, where they were, to the land of Canaan. But God knew that they would be totally bowled over by the Philistines who were in that area. So God led them a different way. But it didn't have to take 40 years. I think I could even probably walk from Egypt to Canaan and it wouldn't take 40 years. All right. Glad you guys are here. Okay. So notice another thing. God tells Moses what's coming. You know, he doesn't always do that for us, but he tells Moses, because Moses is the leader, he tells him what's coming. And so he said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will follow. And I don't know if Moses told that to the children of Israel or not. He may have, so that they would know what was coming. But anyway, in verse 9, the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea. Moses might have thought, oh, I hope God doesn't really do that. Maybe he'll change his mind and not have Pharaoh follow us. But anyway, he knew, God told him. And so when Pharaoh came, it should not have been a surprise to Moses. Verse 10, when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. That means vehemently and exceedingly afraid. And anybody would have been. Egypt was the greatest country in the world at that time, and their army was ferocious. They had chariots, and they thought, oh, now we're in trouble. They were afraid. And look what they did, though. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. I get a kick out of it. It means to shriek. And you know what? Sometimes don't you feel like shrieking? So you've got the children of Israel here, there, and remember, there's a lot of them. You know, there's a lot of conjecture. There could have been 1 million people. So they were camped by the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh. So there's really nowhere they can go, left or right maybe, but
That is probably very smart on the Lord's part.
oh yeah, they would.
They
That's
would have
true.
scattered. We'd run it.
Leanne said that's probably smart of the Lord because they would have scattered if they could. So they reacted by crying out to God, but were they confident that he would hear them and answer their cry? That's the problem. They did cry to God, but then look what they said. And they said to Moses, and of course, if anybody's upset with anything in their life, they go to whoever's the leader. It's their fault, right? Be careful, because that's what we all do. Oh, it can't be my fault. It's got to be their fault. They said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? You know what? They actually did die in the wilderness. Because they refused. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I had to put that in there because that was their big fear. We didn't want to die in the wilderness. Well, then they should have acted a little bit different. Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us? In other words, Moses, why did you do this? To carry us forth out of Egypt. And he's probably thinking, I didn't do this. It was God. Not my fault. Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? Leave me alone. I want to be a slave. For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Okay, in typology, Egypt was a picture of the world. And God delivering the Israelites out of Egypt compares to us getting saved and being delivered from the world, from the sin, and being a child of God. So it would be like us saying, Lord, this is what you're doing in my life? I might as well just not even be a Christian. I might as well go back in the world. That's kind of what they were saying to him. And Moses said to the people, he was pretty patient at this point, fear ye not. He knew that it was spoken out of fear. It was. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. So when God talked to Moses, when God was speaking to Moses about what he was going to do through Pharaoh, he said, I will be honored in verse 4. I will be honored upon Pharaoh. Well, I didn't get exactly what that meant at first, but Moses knew exactly what that meant. That meant that God would slay Pharaoh and the army. God told Moses that. And God wasn't trying to be, you got to figure out this mystery. No, the wording's just different and the translation is different. But God told Moses, I'm going to take care of Pharaoh. You don't have to worry him ever. That's why he says this to the Israelites. You shall see them again no more forever. Moses trusted what God said to him. He knew it was true. The Lord shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. So I checked, and it's conjectured that it was about 25 days into their journey at this point. So 25 days had passed since all of those plagues God did in Egypt. 25 days of exulting in the fact that they were not slaves anymore, that they had left Egypt and they did not leave Egypt empty. The Egyptians gave them spoil. I can imagine the Egyptians have lost their firstborn in all of their houses, and there's been so many plagues on their land that they were going bankrupt, and they were very excited to get these guys out of here because their God is too strong for our land. And so I could see the Egyptian ladies going in there and just grabbing all their jewels and say, here, take it, just go. And so the Israelites went out with spoil. God does everything well. He does above and beyond what we might think. So I can imagine for a while, first few days, they were just exulting in all the riches that they had. And they're leaving Egypt and they're excited. And 25 days later, maybe some of it had worn off. I'm not sure. They had very short memories.
The remarkable thing to me is all of this had been told to Abraham almost to the day when God would bring them out and that they would not come out empty-handed.
Right.
Everything was talk about laid out.
Yeah.
Of course, it was 300 years later, but still in all.
Yeah, it's kind of like us having the Bible to go by and thinking, yeah. So now that Pharaoh's behind them and the sea is in front of them, do you think they might have remembered all the mighty God that led them out of Egypt and all the plagues that he performed in their sight? And how, they should have remembered. Really, they should have. I'm careful because in the Bible, when I think, well, they should have done that, I think, well, would I have done that too? But I really do think they should have remembered a little bit better. But Moses remembered, and God was leading him and talking to him, and his trust in God was really strong. He knew God would do what he said he would do. So, I'm going to read something to you real quick. It's later on in the lesson, but
What's neat is they used that gold later to build the temple.
yes, that's true. Alice said they used that gold and some of the things they got from Egypt to build the tabernacle later. Yes. In Psalms 106, verse 21, and we'll get this, it's later on in the handout, but they forgot God their Savior, who had done great things in Egypt, wondrous works in the land of Ham, and terrible things by the Red Sea. So God even thought they should have remembered. So, verse 15, and the Lord said to Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. So I can imagine God he's spoken to Moses, but I know how I would be. Here's Pharaoh, and I'm in charge of all those people, and then there's the sea, and I would be thinking, okay, Lord, how are you going to do it? Anytime now. You said you'd do this, all right, Lord. I would want to, right now. So God, and I'm sure Moses was saying, Lord, do you see? Do you see what's happening? We don't have much time left, Lord. And God says, wherefore criest thou to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. And he says, verse 16, but lift thou up thy rod and stretch out thine hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and I will get me honor or receive glory upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, upon his chariots and on his horsemen. So it doesn't look like here he told Moses exactly how it would happen. Again, though, he says it's going to happen. He says, take your rod. And this was the same rod. I think Moses had experienced God working when he used his rod. Remember how he threw it down and it became a snake? He grabbed it, it became a rod again. When God did some of the plagues through Moses, it was through his rod. Moses was using his rod often. So here, shouldn't have been unusual for Moses to know that God was going to use his rod. So, verse 19, and the angel of God, this is a neat little intercept here, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. So that would have given some confidence if they'd been watching and known, okay, the cloud that was in front of them for that 25 days, now that cloud moved and stood behind them, between them and Egypt, the Egyptians.
But it's just a cloud thing.
That's true. Maybe they thought, and really they might have thought that. I'm sure there's some of them that did not realize that cloud was from God.
They might have thought, is God going to take us back there?
Maybe.
They're supposed to follow the cloud.
Yeah, right. So we think all kinds of things that rule God out. We're pretty good at that. Saying, just a cloud, like I said. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and darkness to them, the Egyptians, but it gave light by night to Israel, so that the one came not near the other all night. I think, I could be wrong, but it seems like from reading this that it was dark and the Egyptians couldn't do anything in the dark, so they were going to wait for day. But it was light on the Israel side. So I guess I just hadn't remembered before that this pretty much happened at night. The crossing of the Red Sea was at night. So, but they had light.
And why do you say that?
You'll see.
Okay. I hadn't thought about it being at night.
Yeah. So, but we can see that, okay, the same cloud that brought darkness to the Egyptians on the other side was light to Israel. Common sense tells us that doesn't normally happen. It has to be God. Okay. And then as that was happening, it says they came not near the other all night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and it was sometime during the night. And the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night. And I have this question. I wonder if Moses had to keep his hand stretched out all night. I don't know. Maybe he'd rest on a rock or something. And the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Now, just normally, I don't know, it'd have to be a real strong wind to dry that bottom of the sea out just in a few hours, which is what happened. And then it tells us that the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground. Were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And this is why I think it was at night. The next verse says, and it came to pass that in the morning watch, that's about 3, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud. Notice, he looked out from where he was in the pillar of fire and cloud and troubled the host of the Egyptians, took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. So it would take a little bit of faith, I think, for the Israelites, and this is all I'm giving them, to go through. The ground was dry, the sea was a wall on each side, so that it was a miracle. I mean, there was no question about that. But to actually go through that would take a little bit of trust, don't you think?
Well,
So
it's either drown or get killed or go back to slavery.
That's true. That's true. So maybe that's the way they thought. But the reason I'm saying that is because I'll read a little bit later. It tells us in Hebrews that they trusted God at the Red Sea. It's one of the few times I think they trusted Him.
Well, think about this too. I've always thought this is kind of strange. It says he troubled the host of the Egyptians and took off their chariot wheels.
Look at Psalm 77. I think we find a little bit how he might have done that. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, Selah. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee, they were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water, the skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven, the lightnings lightened the world, the earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Just means hidden. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So this is also describing the event. It may have been that there was a big storm, and somehow in the storm the chariots started having trouble. I'm not sure how
They drove that across
Oh,
and
God.
then
Yes.
rained.
Yeah,
And then they come.
yeah, God can do that too. Whatever.
I
So
mean, after crossing the Red Sea, who wants to think he can't do something?
right. It was no small event. It was a big. And you know what I realized as I was studying this? God talks about delivering the people from the Israelites from the Red Sea, from Egypt through the Red Sea. All through the Bible, you find that. Always. And God uses it as an example of His mightiness toward us. Is that a word, mightiness? Anyway, His word for us. He wants us to remember that. He wants them to remember that. So we know He's powerful, He can do anything, and we can trust Him. That's what He wants to use the Red Sea for sake. All right, so you know what He also did through this? It was a huge deal, big enough so that word of this spread. I don't know how it spread, but it spread to the land of Canaan. They got there. In fact, I'll read it in Joshua 2, 9 and 10. Rahab said to the men, okay, the spies came. They got in contact with her. She said to those men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. So I don't know how they heard, but they heard. God made it a huge deal because He was preparing the land of Canaan, those inhabitants, to be scared to death of Israel, and they're gone. So He was doing a lot of things through this. And then verse 26, and the Lord said to Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. That's why I kind of think it happened at night. And the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. It's interesting to me that God didn't, He could have just said, okay, Moses, watch, and had the waters in the Red Sea part, and and the children of Israel go by and go through, and then God could have just had the waters come back over the Egyptians. But he works as a side thought, he works through our leaders. Does that mean Moses is any better than all of them or any? No, not at all. Just God chose to use him to lead his people, and God worked through him. And God works through our leaders too, whether we like them or not. Okay, so verse 28, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. No one got away. I would have hated to be part of Pharaoh's army at that time.
Do you think Pharaoh went into?
I don't
I
know.
was just out and watched his army.
I don't know. But
No, it doesn't say.
it doesn't say. So some think that maybe he stayed back and just sent his army out after them. But
That's what modern.
yeah.
It's just the
Yeah.
order of things.
Mom, cartoon, he dies.
Well, there was a verse
And I like that.
made me think maybe he did die, but I would. So, verse 29 of Exodus 14, the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did on the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. There, right there is the children of Israel trusting in God. But we'll see how long that lasted. It's easy to trust God, just have seen a miraculous thing that he did. No, they trusted him, I think, when they came out of Egypt. 25 days later, they were ready to go back to Egypt. But now they've seen a mighty, miraculous thing. Let's see how long it takes them to forget. All right, in Psalms 106:7, this is just describing it. Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. God was provoked when they fussed at Moses like they did, saying, we would have been better off back in Egypt. God heard that, and that provoked God. He didn't like that. Our fathers understood not thy wonders. They remembered not. They forgot what he did. Or it just lost its power in their hearts to make them able to trust God. Nevertheless, he saved him for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. I think God had a lot of different reasons that he made such a big deal at the Red Sea. But part of it was to encourage them to trust him, because he knew what was ahead for them, and they would need to trust him. That was part of the reason he had them go across the land on it was dry ground at the bottom of the sea, and it was. I think that's why there was thunder and a huge storm. It was a big. God wanted them to remember it. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up. He led them through the depths as through the wilderness. And he saved them from the land of him that hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. That was Egypt. And the waters covered their enemies, not one of them was left. Then believed they his words, and sang his praise. And the next verse, the very next verse, they soon forgot his works. They waited not for his counsel. They forgot the Lord their Savior, which had done great things in Egypt, wondrous works in the land of Ham, and terrible things by the Red Sea. God couldn't have been more miraculous than he was at that point. Okay, verse 22 in chapter 15 of Exodus now. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness. Keep that in mind, 3 days, and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Mara or Mara, I'm not sure how to say that, for they were bitter. And the people murmured. That means to complain and be obstinate against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Who do you think they were really saying it against? God, yes. So it took 3 days to forget the mighty crossing of the Red Sea. They should have thought, okay, God just did this wonderful, mighty thing at the Red Sea. Before that, he saved us from Egypt with all those mighty plagues. Do we think he can't provide water for us? Do we think that he doesn't have a plan for us because he did all this to get us out of Egypt and did all that to get us out of across the Red Sea and out of the hand of the enemy? Do we think he's going to let us die or no water? That doesn't even make common sense. But they murmured and they said, what are we going to drink, Moses? You're the one responsible, Moses. What are we going to drink? And all the congregation, so I'm getting ahead of myself. So I'm skipping some now. Of course, at that place where the Mara, God had Moses put a tree or a tree branch into the water and it made it sweet. So they could, and there's so many wonderful stories through here and types and everything, but that's not necessarily my focus. So I'm skipping now to the time when they've already gone through Mount Sinai and gotten the law and experienced all kinds of things. Now I'm bringing you up to the border of the Promised Land. And let's see, God had led them all that way with the pillar of cloud, the pillar of fire. They had no excuse to not think that God was in the midst of them, and experienced all kinds of wonderful things through the wilderness too. But in Numbers 14, 1 through 4, and I think this is the saddest place in the whole Bible. They were at the border of the Promised Land. They had sent the 12 spies in, and they came back with a glowing report of the land. This is a beautiful, wonderful land, flowing with milk. And they remember the grapes that it took 2 men to carry. I love grapes. That would have been really cool to have those. But we had 10 of the spies tell them, but okay, there's a problem here. It has giants in the land, and I don't remember if the 10 spies brought back an evil report, saying there's no way that we can go in and be victorious. Okay, so what they were saying was, even though our God was mighty enough to part the Red Sea, even though he was mighty enough to bring about all those plagues on Egypt and so that they let us go with spoil, even though he was mighty enough to be on the top of Mount Sinai with thunderings and lightnings and give us the law that was written by the hand of God, even though he gave us manna, even the list goes on and on and on. But, those giants in the land of Canaan are probably going to be too much for God. So, what did the congregation do when the 10 spies told them the story of how hard it would be to go into Canaan? And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried.
They believed them.
Yeah, they believed the 10 spies. Nobody in there was saying, wait a minute. I thought our God was pretty big myself. Except for Joshua and Caleb. They sent 12 spies, and 10 of them brought the evil report, and Joshua and Caleb, of course. They said, guys, they knew God. They trusted God. I wonder if those numbers, that percentage is still kind of the same of Christians who trust God and who don't. Just a thought. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt. They haven't changed in the entire time. Or would God we had died in this wilderness. Well, they get to do that. And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, Let's make a captain, let us return to Egypt. And that would be like somebody who's a Christian, a child of God, back to the world. I don't think I like that. Same thing. Same. And you know what? They refuse to trust God. They refuse to trust God. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, because I kept asking myself as I was reading this, why? Why did they refuse that? Because sometimes earlier in my life, when I would read this, I'd feel sorry for the Israelites, because I thought, well, they were just afraid of those giants. I would have been afraid of too. But that was not the case at all. I do think they were afraid, but there was a reason for their fear. Okay. So now in Deuteronomy chapter 1, Moses is telling this story. You know, Moses wrote the book of Genesis and Exodus. He's recounting this story for them. And he said, And you murmured in your tents and said, Because the Lord hated us, he hath brought us forth out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us. Have you ever thought the Lord hates you? Whither shall we go up? Our brethren has discouraged our hearts, saying, The people is greater and taller than we. The cities are great and walled up to heaven. And moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakims there. Those are the giants. Then I said to you, Moses said, Dread not, neither be afraid of them. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall fight for you. The same God, he says, according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness, for thou hast seen how the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that you went, until you came into this place. Yet in this thing you did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you, to search you out a place to pitch your tents in fire by night, to show you by what way you should go, and in a cloud by day. Moses was saying all the things that we've been saying here. Did God ever stop the manna? Did he ever make their clothes and shoes wear out like they would have, like they should have? Did God ever let them get lost? Oh. But do we ever come to God and say, Lord, I know you're great, but this is impossible. You just can't do this. We have things that are hard, and we have things that are impossible for us. But there's not one thing that's impossible for God. So then, okay, yeah, I believe God could do this if he wanted. However, I don't think he loves me enough to want to do this. He doesn't care enough. And God was provoked. Verse 34, And the Lord heard the voice of your words and was wroth and sware, saying, Surely there shall not one of these men of this evil generation see that good land which I swear to give to your fathers, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh, he shall see it. And it was Joshua also. I just didn't put that verse in. And to him will I give the land that he hath trodden upon, and to his children, because he hath wholly followed the Lord. There's a key right there. He wholly followed the Lord. The other spies and the children of Israel, the ones who complained and said they were afraid and said God hated them and all that, they were not wholly followed. It's like the double-minded man that we talked about in James. When you've got one foot in Christianity and one foot in the world, nothing will work for you. I think it's worse for you than if you were all in the world, because you're straddling the fence and it just doesn't work.
Somewhere else it says about Caleb that he had a different spirit.
Yes, he had a different spirit. Then he answered and said to me, what's happened between these two verses? Okay, so God told them, okay, you're not going to go into the land. You're going to stay in this wilderness until you died off, and I'll take your children into the land. So remember all the times that they were saying, it would have been better had we died in the wilderness than done this. Well, they get their wish. But when they realize how wroth, how angry God is, and what's going to happen, then they say, oh, we'll go in. We'll go in. And he answered and said to me, we've sinned against the Lord. We will go up and fight according to all that the Lord our God commanded us. That was not what God said. He said, okay, turn and you're going to go to the wilderness. And they said, oh, no, 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 no. We'll fight. We'll fight. They got their armor on, their swords and everything. They're going to obey God now. Well, God had just told them, turn, don't go, don't fight. And when ye had girded on every man his weapons of war, ye were ready to go up to the hill. And the Lord said to me, say to them, go not up, neither fight, for I am not among you, lest you be smitten before your enemies. God warned them, he said, I'm not going to fight for you. It's not my will that you do that. It's my will that you go this way. And they said, oh, no, 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 we'll go fight. And verse 43, so I spake unto you, you would not hear, but rebelled against the commandment of the Lord and went presumptuously up into the hill. They were still disobeying God. Their hearts had not changed. They just didn't like the idea of staying in the wilderness, so they thought, well, okay, we'll do what God wants. But their hearts hadn't changed.
Maybe they were thinking, well, we're going to die anyway. Let's die this way and not spend 40 years.
Well, some of them did die that way. Verse 44, and the Amorites which dwelt in that mountain came out against you and chased you as bees do, and destroyed you in Seir, even unto Hormah, and ye turned and wept before the Lord, because they still were not obeying him. And many of them were killed. They did not win that battle, they lost. One side thought here, we will have battles too, but the presence of God is our victory. God's presence did not go with them, disobeying God. So his presence was not with them, and they lost. And they lost men. So that even was a rebellion. The children of Israel would have to fight to obtain the land that God gave them. But he promised them victory. And his promise was backed up by all the power they'd seen up to that point. And they'd seen a lot more than I've seen. So why did they refuse to go in? Was it just fear? What was the hard hearts, unbelief is the key. It wasn't that God didn't give them every reason to believe him, every reason to know how great, every reason to know that he cared about them. So, you know what I think it was? It was a lack of trust in God's plan for them. They didn't trust that God cared enough about them to have a good plan, better than the plan they could come up with for themselves. It was a lack of trust in God's love and goodness. Well, I don't think God cares, and I don't think he knows how I feel, and I don't think he knows me very well, and I just don't, I don't, I don't trust God to love me. That's They refused God's way because they had a better plan. How often I look at people, Christians, or who decide not to follow the Lord. It's because they don't believe that God's plan is better. They trust in themselves. They have their back. They know what they want. They know what will make them happy, and so that's what they go after. They're not interested in God. The Israelites thought they had a better plan. They were going to make themselves a captain and go back to Egypt. Their better plan was to be slaves for the rest of their lives and their children and their children and their children. That was their better plan. But they didn't even make it back to Egypt. So there comes a point when it's too late for us to follow God, too late for His plan to be implemented in our lives.
Sure hope not.
I hope not too.
I think we do
I
what
do.
could have been, even though different plan.
Messed it up.
Messed it up, but God still loves us, He and His grace and all of that, so we, He doesn't reject us, but we miss out on so much.
Yes, that's the key. He doesn't reject us, especially anybody that comes to Him with a heart that wants Him. He never casts them out.
We just reap what we sow.
Do reap.
See, and that can be,
And the reaping for the Israelites, God did not give them the land of Canaan. That's what they missed out on. They could have spent the rest of their lives in their own homes, in their own land. What does it say? A fig tree and something by every door, like America, it's a car and a home for every person. But they missed out on the land of Canaan. God still went before them with a pillar of cloud. He still led them and guided them with a pillar of fire for 40 years until that generation died off. And then He took their children.
God,
Yes.
because He'd have let them go back to
Oh, I know. Leanne said it was the grace of God. If God let them go back to Egypt, they would have taken all the children too, and nobody would have ever been in the promised land. So I was thinking about what we don't ever have to worry. God saves us, and that is secure. We never lose that. I agree. We don't ever get beyond God's. They weren't, but they did miss out on the land of Canaan. Okay, so in order for us to go, okay, first of all, there's so much I want to say about the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is a picture of the rest of, God calls it rest in Hebrews 4. They missed out. He had a rest for them. In other words, they weren't going to have to fight. They had to fight to get there, but then they could rest. And they saw the fight in between the rest and where they were and thought, I don't want to go there. I don't want to fight. We have to fight battles also. Battles are not too big for the presence of God, just like their battles would not have been either. God was with them, and His presence means we're victorious in every way. We also need to trust that God's plan for us is better than ours. We can't dream up a plan as good as the one He has for us. They had no idea what the land of Canaan, them in the land of Canaan would have meant. So, let me see. I wanted to read you in Hebrews 3:11. It's at the very end. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. And he was talking about the land of Canaan. Take heed, brethren. Now he's talking to me and you. Lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. He calls it an evil heart. Because when we don't trust God, it's evil. We've got to trust God. That's saying, God, you don't care. God, you don't love me. He's warning us against that. So the land of Canaan is just like the plan that God has for me and for you. The land of Canaan is called rest. And do you know what part of the meaning of the word rest is? The word rest, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to Psalms 95. It's on the next page, I think, or maybe
Ours is just on
Okay.
page 5 at the bottom.
Psalms 95, 7 through 11. For he is our God, we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart as in the provocation, as in the day of temptation in the wilderness. So he's talking about the same event that we've been talking about. Harden not your heart. So we know by that their hearts were hard. Their hearts had not changed in all that time in the wilderness. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, they saw my work. 40 years long was I grieved with this generation and said, it is a people that do err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Unto whom I swear in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. You know what part of the meaning of rest is? Matrimony. That means marriage. The church is called the bride of Christ. God has a marriage supper for us in heaven. But that marriage supper is for the bride of Christ, not necessarily the entire church. Those who have given their lives to him completely and totally. And those without spot or wrinkle. Those are the ones that God has that rest for. That is the land of it means repose or abode. That's where he wants us to live. And as his bride. Or then in his presence. So we'll trust God. That is what he's prepared for us. He's planned for us. And the battles that the Israelites would have needed to fight to get into the land and their children fought. God is right there giving them victory. God is right there giving us victory. Unfortunately, sometimes I think, I know I would have a tendency to say, well, I would love to have the land of Canaan. I would love to be in the bride. I would love to sit at that marriage supper of the Lamb. But I don't really like the suffering. I don't like the battles. I really don't want to go that way. So it depends on which wins in my heart. Love for God and want to go his way and trust him that he will carry me through those battles. Decision that, it's not worth it, so I'm not going to do that. No. Pardon? Love for me, yes. I think it was love for God that they didn't have in their hearts. Because if we love God, that's what causes us to be willing to lay our lives down for him.
Thinking of that verse in Matthew, take my yoke, all you who are labor and heavy laden, come to me. Which I thought with matrimony, with marriage, you couple together.
That's true. Yes, I like that thought. And also a coupling together with him in his sufferings.
On and says, learn of me. Learn
Yes.
of me.
So God called the children of Israel did not love God. That's where the problem. They wanted their own plan more than God's plan. So look at Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And we know that all things work together for good to those that love God. Do we really believe this? How about what I'm going through right now? Is that going to work good? God really do that? Joy. Yes. 35. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, or sword? You know that Paul experienced all of it. But God's presence was with him. Just like the Israelites. You want to say, you guys are crazy. Shake them and say, God's with you. God's with you. You don't have to worry about that battle. Go through it. God's with you. You know? God's with us too. God is with us in every single thing. And that presence of God means victory. When he's not with us, we don't have victory. But when he's with us, we have victory every single time. And then Paul says, he goes on in Romans 8, as it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. He felt like that sometimes. He was imprisoned. He was beaten. He was stoned. He was shipwrecked in the ocean several times. And he says, this same man says in verse 37, nay, in all these things. And I'm glad I don't have to go through all those things. We don't have to go through those things. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. It's the same thing Moses wanted. He said to the children of Israel, just in different words. We are more than conquerors through God's presence with us. And they said, no. They just didn't believe it. And they didn't care. They wanted their own way. And if we're not careful, we do the same thing. And then in 1 John 5:4, for whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world. Are you born of God? Yes, we are all born of God here. And we overcome the world. And this is the victory. Here's the way we overcome the world. Even our faith. Faith and trust, the same thing. We overcome in these battles by trusting him that he's with us. Philippians 1:6, being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. What's our part in this? So he performs it in us. He brings about his plan for me. What's my part?
Being confident.
Trusting that I can follow him and it's going to be good. Yes, confident in God and in his character, that he is love, that he loves me. But you guys, we can derail the victory. We can, like the children of Israel, live in the wilderness when God had Canaan for us. We can do that. I wish we couldn't. I wish he'd kind of just make it so that we go into the land of Canaan. But he wants us to trust him. He wants us to know that he loves us. And Moses and Joshua and Caleb, and probably, Aaron was dead at that time, tried to get the children of Israel to say, God loves you. He has a beautiful plan, a beautiful land for you to live in. Don't do your own thing. You can't come near what God has for you. Don't you want to just yell that to all the family members and the friends that are not following God? But we need to trust him. And the children of Israel, and the result was that they wandered in the wilderness. I know some Christians who are wandering in the wilderness right now. God doesn't want that for them. Psalms 95. He is our God. We are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart, as in the provocation, as in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my work. That's the only way, the only reason that they could have seen all the glorious miracles that I think more than any other group of people, pretty much, except for maybe the Jews who lived in Jesus' time. All those miracles they saw. And still, that amazing. 40 years long I was grieved with this generation and said, it is a people that do err in their heart, and they have not known my ways, unto whom I swear in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. I think some of the tears that God wipes away in heaven are tears that we shed because we realize what we gave up to have our. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing. I want to land I want the bride to be that bride at that marriage supper of the Lamb. That's what I want. But only God can help me get there. And I have to trust Him. And sometimes I find myself saying, Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. I don't want to, Jesus, I trust in you. You know, because sometimes we face things that just like, not that God can do it, can't do anything, but it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. All things work to those that love Him. All things did not work together for good for the children of Israel because they didn't love Him. More lessons on trust. I appreciate that God is speaking to us just like He did to the children of Israel. Trust me. That's what He's saying.